tell the story of this great, like, when you met me, you either thought I was a liar or older than I was.
Welcome to the Dialects of Art Series. Here we explore what it means to make art for an audience in a postmodern world. Let's get real with how artists see the world and tell their story. Your hosts are Yori and Dana Seeger, co-creators of the School of Visual Philosophy, where we believe art is a method of communication and a way of looking at the world. If you are an artist or curious about how and why artists create their work, this series is for you. So let's dive right into this episode.
Fancy. All right, we are at 2:20, so let's see how long it takes and kind of have fun. Okay. So this is the first in a series of talks titled The Dialects of Art, put together by Dana Seeger, who is the current...
one of the creative ambassadors for the city of San Jose.
So give me, why? What is this? What is this? Why does art even begin to matter?
Well, let's take a step back and talk about what a dialect is, because the dialects of art, we keep saying that, but what exactly is a dialect? So the way that we see art functioning as a language, like any other language, it has structure, it has grammar, it has rules that it has to follow. And within that, we realize that even though it's a universal language, there are still subtleties within that we're calling dialects. And
so like what, one culture will see the color yellow and then a different culture sees it differently and
yeah, so like if you think
differently?
about, say, the English language, and you think about people who speak English in, say, Ireland, and people who speak it in, the south of the United States, they're going to have different dialects, and that the way that the words are put together and the words that they use and the cadence, it's all affected by their culture, the geography, and same with art. So even though I'm using the color yellow because of my experience and my culture and how I grew up, where I grew up, I'm using it differently. I'm coming at my artwork, at the language of art, from a different perspective. And I think perspective is really where it's at in terms of communication. So if you want to communicate a language, you have to not only understand the structure of that language, but you have to also understand your audience. So this is where the project really comes into focus.
So I am an educated artist, I would like to think, maybe. Spent many years getting that education, and in school, it's never really approached, or at least the experiences I have, that art's a language and it's meant to communicate. I think the common grain now is to make things that are about the self.
Personal, yeah.
And I probably shouldn't touch the microphone, but self-indulgent in a way where it's all about my world and all about my experience or my feeling, and then maybe the audience can get a glimpse of that. So you're treating art as a very different.
Well, yes and no. So I do think there's a place for self-expression, and I think that if you look at history and time periods, in the academic training sense of Western art, there's that tradition and there's the structure and there's, this is what a painting is and this is how you create that illusion. And then in modernism, the focus was on the actual physical materials and the forms and breaking it down into the abstractions of the basic elements. And so then it became more about sort of the physicalness and the expression. But then we sort of lost the academic sense in addition to that. And so if you think about the way that art is taught now, you're taught to find your voice, and you're taught that
I hated that in school. It's always find your voice, but what the hell does that mean?
Well, yeah, what is my voice, and why does it matter, and who am I? But I think if you understand and have a balance of that traditional structure and foundation, then you can start to communicate. And there's definitely a time and a place for like visual journaling, I would call it. So I wouldn't necessarily write in my journal and then put it out as like literature. But it has a purpose, right? And so same with that type of artwork that is expressive and, can connect to people on another level because they can understand what you're going through perhaps. But it's still not necessarily designed to communicate to someone else.
Okay, so we understand what a dialect is. What's the simplest question there? What is art, and what differences? What makes that difference? What makes something an art piece, and where do we go from there?
Yeah. So I mean, if you want to call something art versus, let's say, craft, there's definitely skill in craft and craftsmanship and the traditional crafts, handicrafts, and there's artistry there. But unless you have that message in addition to the craft, I wouldn't necessarily call it art, because art to me is meant to communicate. And
does it have to be complicated? Can it just be a feeling or communicated? Does it have to
I
be
don't know.
a story?
So I was thinking about this just now as I'm talking, because, for instance, the art that I'm creating for the Triton show has a lot to do with my family heritage.
She doesn't toot her own horn. She's got a show coming up, a solo show at a museum, and that was going to be part of my question. Is what you're talking about dialects of art and communication. Give me a personal example. So you're in this project you're creating. What are you doing?
So in this project, I'm developing my relationship to my own culture, which is the Baltic culture. So I'm second generation American. My mom was born here, but my grandparents were both born in Estonia and Latvia. And their way of living and of communicating was through textiles. And the art that they created was mittens and belts, and their textiles had that symbolism and meaning, and everybody who grew up in that culture knew those symbols, and they knew what they were talking about.
So a mitten was a piece of art and not a piece of craft.
I think it was both. If you think about art as, again, a method of communicating maybe with the spiritual world, so communicating with nature because they were, farmers and cultivated the land, they were in tune with that, so all their symbols had to do with the cycles of the earth, and we don't, somebody who comes to see a show about these textiles wouldn't necessarily know that because they're not familiar with that perspective, point of view.
So the patterns are communication. They're not just shapes for the sake of being
right.
shaped.
They're decoration, but I feel like they have a deeper meaning, yeah. And so when you so that becomes sort of a sticky situation where is it craft, is it art? And I know that's not really what this talk and series is about, but just the fact that it's sort of been divorced from art education, the California College of Arts and Crafts took out the crafts part, and they thought about that, they had a reason.
So let's back step a little bit and give people listening to this a reason to why they might be interested in listening to you. So Dana's been studying pedagogy and andragogy and how people learn and how they communicate, specifically as an art teacher, and in an attempt to better her methods of being able to communicate and teach through art and get other people to have a good learning experience. And from that, we have started to not only try to redevelop structure within language, because, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm putting words in your mouth, and she think that there's been a degradation in the field and the language of art, in terms of how do you make a sentence, how do you make an idea, how do you deliver that concept so that other people understand it. And then beyond that, we started to study the elements of storytelling. So once you know how to speak a language, how do you actually fully tell a story? And there are absolutely formulas and methods of that. Mm-hmm. And so you spend the last at least 7 years diving pretty deep into these things. You're halfway through writing a book about it. You've got classes all over the place on these things. So that's where you're coming from. And now you're diving a little deeper into the dialects. But what brought you there, and why is that important? So we live in a city in San Jose where there are more cultures, I think, than maybe anywhere else.
Yeah, it's very diverse.
Put together in one world, or in one city, I mean. And, in my opinion, these miscommunications are often what lead to tensions. And is that what you're addressing, or is it just simply understanding that you don't know dialects, all the dialects, and you're diving into it? Tell me more about.
Yes, so as an educator, I call myself a compulsive learner and a compulsive educator because I love telling people what I know.
Addict is the right word.
But as an educator, I feel like it's my mission, but also what I love to do, to introduce people to different topics and subjects and then see them make connections and then grow their own practice in art or in life. And so part of this, the goal of why I wanted to do this lecture series was to engage the public into not only seeing how artists communicated their own, personal point of view, but also so that, because I feel like there's a lack in the way that the public understands art. The general public is gonna maybe not understand going into a gallery and seeing a piece of artwork. And we could talk about this all day.
In fact, that's the only time we argue. It's when we go to a museum.
Because, the way that art is presented has changed drastically over time. And again, I don't believe that artists are taught well how just the depth of the way that people interact with artwork. The difference between seeing it in a book and seeing it on a blank gallery wall with or without a frame versus seeing it in a church and seeing it up on a pedestal versus seeing it down, on the ground. Like, there's so much to not only creating the work, but also presenting it and how people view it, that I think it's not only lost on artists who create the work, who try to communicate it with the public, but also to the public who aren't used to having that, they're just not taught how to view art and how to see it and what it means.
So throughout the rest of the series, who are the other people you're going to invite?
Yeah,
and
so
what
the
are
purpose, right, so the kind of the dawning or the reason why we really wanted to start this, sort of the I don't know, the catalyst, that's a good word. The catalyst was actually the Black Lives Matter movement a year or two ago. So there was a sort of a realization or a wake-up call about how we see art as functioning as a universal language, and maybe we were kind of misunderstood or we're missing something, because if you don't understand somebody else's point of view, that leads to misunderstandings and much greater problems in the world. And so we were trying to think about what our little art school could do and how we could react in an authentic way. And so we started thinking about point of view and perspective and how art can be that bridge to communicate, but we also have to understand, again, the point of view of who we're talking to. So it can't just be like a one-way street. It can't be like, I'm going to tell you this and you're going to listen to me. It has to be a conversation. So that's kind of the catalyst for this series, and I'm really excited that I got the opportunity to fund these lectures so that I can bring in people like public art directors and city planners, people who have a real finger on the pulse of what's happening, not only for artists who want to maybe get a public commission or get their work into a gallery and they don't understand why I keep applying to this gallery but I keep getting rejected. Are you speaking to the right audience? Are these gallery owners, even wanting to look at your art? Does it speak to their audience? So it's kind of
so how does the dialect tie into that realm? So when we talk to them in this conversation, are we saying, how do the different dialects get represented? What are the dialects in this city? How does that manifest, and how does it affect future culture? Is that?
I think so. I can speak to my, own perspective and my own point of view, and I can tell people why I have chosen certain, colors and patterns and symbols, and I'm hoping that by asking these people, these interviewees, kind of about their backgrounds and their cultures and what makes them tick, that they'll start to realize maybe these subconscious choices that they're making and kind of open their eyes and open the public's eyes and open artists' eyes to why these decisions get made. Just again, start a dialogue about how culture really does affect decisions and things that people do on a daily basis.
So that's a wrap on our first episode of the Dialects of Art series. Thank you so much for joining us as we embark on this journey of artistic and cultural discovery. Next week, we'll be talking more with Dana about her personal heritage, artistic vocabulary, and ethnic symbolism, and how she brings it all together for an interactive and holistic experience.